Good afternoon and welcome to the ETSU Ballad Health Strong Brain Institute Resilience Presentation Series. If you are not part of our email list and would like to, please use the chat, put your email in, and we will get you on our list of when we have other talks. And this is a Zoom, as you all know, and so chat is the way to communicate with each other, share who you are, where you're from, commentary, and then questions, and we'll be monitoring the chat as we go. My name is Michelle Mosier, and I'm a psychologist by training and the director of the ETSU Center of Excellence for Children in State Custody. I also serve as part of the steering wheel and as the associate director of community engagement for the Strong Brain Institute. The Strong Brain Institute was founded by a $1 million 5-year grant to ETSU from Ballad Health. The goal of the Strong Brain Institute is to use the science of childhood adversity coupled with mitigation science and resilience science to prevent and mitigate the negative impacts of ACEs on children's and adults' lives, and to promote awareness and the use of resilience-informed procedures and policies, both at ETSU and throughout the Appalachian Highlands. We're a resource for people to turn to when they have questions about how to best employ resilience-informed strategies and practices in their workspaces. For more information about the Strong Brain Institute and to access recordings of this series from previous presentations, you can go to our website, and Lisa's going to put that website in the chat. And you can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So find us there, and we advertise all the talks there and also share some other information. So I am so excited to have the privilege today to introduce Dr. Patti van Eys, our presenter. I've had the opportunity to collaborate with Dr. van Eys over many years. Now, I'm not going to say how many, and learn from her both as a colleague and a close friend. Dr. van Eys is well known not only for her expertise with mental health, resilience, and children with complex trauma, but also as a gifted and engaging presenter. Dr. van Eys is a licensed clinical psychologist and consultant for the van Eys Mental Health regarding trauma and mental health. She has 10 years of corporate experience, including vice president of products for Pathways at Work, where she worked with corporations regarding mental health challenges in various work environments. Also, as previously as chief clinical officer for a foster care and behavioral health organization, and as a clinical manager of behavioral health at Blue Care, Tennessee, where she piloted programs and wellness initiatives with Medicaid partners. For the 17 years before that, I guess you're outing yourself, Patti. For the 17 years before that, Dr. van Eys served as a full-time faculty in psychology and psychiatry at Vanderbilt University. She is a much sought after and popular presenter at local, regional, and national levels on trauma-informed care. And the joys of her life are playing with her 2 young granddaughters. I know Dr. van Eys has a lot of information to share with us, so please join me in welcoming Dr. van Eys, who will be presenting Thriving or Surviving, Building Everyday Resilience.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's always great to partner with you and Wally, and it's great to see you all and other friends that are on here that I may have known in the past. Great to have you here, and welcome to everyone. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm hoping that it's showing. Michelle, can you give me a thumbs up if it is? All right, perfect. So I have been speaking with lots of groups over the past couple of years now around this topic of how in the world can we be thriving in the world we live in right now. It's hard enough just to be human. Being human is tough. And yet we've had so much come on us in the last several years. The pandemic being only one of those things. But racial divides and political divides and war and climate issues and economic issues and mass shootings. We have had so much as a culture, as a world, as human beings together collectively. So really I'm excited to talk to you today about what do we have control over to manage this world that is really has gotten really tough for us. Because what we know is that adversity doesn't discriminate. Basically, if we're alive, we're going to have to deal with some tough times. One of the things that's happened in our culture is that we have these shiny, picture perfect images on Instagram, on Facebook. This is the norm. These, oh, life is so perfect and shiny. And what we all know is that that's not the full picture of our human experience. But sometimes, and I think especially for our young people, it can seem like, oh, is that the way life is supposed to be? So what we know is that stressful life events are going to happen. They have happened. They're happening today. They're uncertain. It's part of the journey. And again, let's just explore together how to navigate all of these stressful life events and these stressful life changes. What we know is it's not only negative events that cause us stress, but even positive events, positive change can cause stress. And what I'd like to do today is for us to kind of unpack stress, think about what really is stress, and how we can even reframe that to sometimes being positive. We have stressful events like promotions and marriages and graduations and trying to figure out our futures and having more children in our families and all these kinds of things. So let's get a good reframe on stress and not always label it as bad. However, what we do know is that negative stress can overwhelm us. And when we are overwhelmed with events that cause trauma, events that actually overwhelm our usual capacity to cope, then we've got to pick ourselves up and figure out how to get the help we need to come through that overwhelm. Because too much stress of the negative type, and we'll talk more about what that means, but too much stress can actually cause clinical depression, clinical anxiety, so that we're then really having problems with our day-to-day functioning. So again, stress can, in the chronic form, cause all kinds of physical ailments, and in the positive form can actually cause great things to happen. So let's move along with what I had hoped people might do before coming to this talk. And I know that some of you have not had a chance to download this form that you see in front of you, but I also know that some of you have not only downloaded it, but filled it out. A little bird told me that before I started this talk. So one of the things that you can do for yourselves is take a check on your own mental well-being, physical well-being, emotional well-being, and spiritual well-being. We really want to talk about resilience as a holistic concept, that resilience is related to the whole person. We don't cut off our heads from our bodies as humans. We're all one together. So all of you have this handout. You have access to it. It's in your chat box if you didn't get it from Lisa to start with. And I'm hoping that you've had a chance to look it over, and if not, looking it over right now is what you can be doing. Do a little check on your body. Are you eating well? Are you taking stretch breaks? Are you finding the right kind of sleep environment? Take a check on your emotions. How are you doing emotionally? Are you finding time every day for activities that you enjoy? Are you finding that you're stopping to express your gratitude and appreciation? We know that in that emotional realm, even something as simple as stating things that you're grateful for and reaching out and telling somebody else about your gratitude or your appreciation, even that simple practice of gratitude, the science is saying, raises our good brain hormones and makes us more balanced, more content, more stable and happy. How about your mind? Have you taken a check on your mind? Are you taking time to slow down, be aware, kind of breathe and reflect on your inner life? Are you taking a check on your time so that you're not working constantly, but that you're balancing your time so your mind gets breaks? How are you doing on that part of your life? And then spirit. Um, Spirit is really different for everybody and how you're going to define that. I want to add to the four dots that are here on this checklist. For spirit, I want you to be thinking about, are you also finding time every day to find beauty, to reflect in nature or walk in nature or notice nature? Are you finding moments in your weeks where you can actually experience what I call awe? I'm actually reading a book right now called Awe. It's a book by Dr. Keltner, and it's about the neuroscience of awe and what that does for us as human beings. It raises our neurochemistry again to that positive level. That's part of spiritual well-being. So once you have a chance to do this handout, you can self-score your overall energy around these four parts. Begin to reflect on the areas where you're really doing well in your balance, and begin to make a plan about how to address the areas that you're neglecting, that you need help to raise up. And hopefully, as we talk through some options today, you'll be able to grab onto some tips that will help you make your plan. So again, you've got the handout. You're invited to fill it out and score it for yourself following this talk. Because I really want to emphasize this quote. Just because I or you or somebody that you're in contact with are carrying life well, carrying it well, doesn't mean it isn't heavy, and doesn't mean that there isn't a burden going on for us or for that person. Because even if we're very resilient people,
Sure.
we can have difficult times in our lives, difficult seasons. We are all human beings. We all have our limits.
You have the trash at the office.
We all have unique reminders of loss in our lives or times of adversity. And sometimes when we haven't kept ourselves in balance, these reminders can really tip the scale for us. Or if something happens, if we're kind of hanging on by a thread and we're powering through, but then something happens in our life that was unexpected, it can actually drive us into tipping over into that anxiety or that depression. So one of the things I'm going to emphasize in this talk is self-compassion. How you would treat yourself. You know, if somebody else were carrying something heavy and they were having a hard time, you would be gracious to them. You would help them along. You would support them. And I'm going to suggest that we can be just that kind also to ourselves, just that gracious to ourselves. So again, why are we talking about this today? And I began this talk saying, we've been through the mill as human beings together. Collectively, we've endured so much more stress and trauma recently than we have in probably earlier in our lifetimes. And again, unmanaged stress, unmanaged trauma can lead us into anxiety and depression that also can become something that makes us very dysfunctional in our lives. What we know is that during the pandemic, kind of toward the end of it, we had some statistics that came out of a NAMI report, National Alliance on the Mentally Ill report in 2022, saying that 64% of kids are saying that the world is more stressful now than when their parents were kids. That's their perception. And what we do know also from that report is that 1 in 6 kids are endorsing having negative emotions all the time or most of the time. 1 in 6 kids are having negative emotions most of the time, day to day. And 1 in 4 kids have mental health diagnoses. So we know that with our young people, our reports are looking, looking like we need to pay some attention there. We also know a report that came out in 2021 said that over 50% of adults were saying that COVID-19 caused them to experience a more of a negative impact on their mental health. And from 2019 to 2021, anxiety disorders and depressive disorders rose from 11% to 41%. So we know that just during the pandemic, by that alone, we began to see mental health kind of crises, if you will, in terms of our numbers. We had unprecedented spikes in death by suicide. We have had unprecedented spikes in death by overdose. So we know that just by living through these last 3 years, we have to pay more attention to ourselves around our well-being. Let's unpack stress just a little bit, because as I said earlier in the foreshadowing slide, a little bit of stress can actually be positive. It can improve our performance. It can improve our motivation. Just think about, some of you may have been in marching bands or in sports teams or in theater groups or in debate. You all did extracurricular kinds of things with teams. Some of you may have been in individual sports as well, or individual performances. And what you may remember is getting pumped up before you had to go on stage, or pumped up before you went out on that field. And the coach in the locker room is notorious for really yelling at the team and getting them pumped up. That's actually adding a bit of positive stress into the team system and into each individual. And what we know is that we get our hearts pumping, our adrenaline going, our cortisol starts to raise a bit, and we can actually go out there and just really do our best, because we're motivated in a way that's energized our bodies and our minds. That's positive stress. Positive stress comes even when it's like, hey, I've got a task to do and I want to do a good job on this task, and I'm going to rise to the challenge of the task. It's manageable and it's predictable and it gets us energized. So again, it makes us do our best, this positive stress, rise to the challenge, motivates us to succeed. And bullet number 4 here is what I really want us to kind of think about most. Positive stress is going to be in moderate dose, usually in small doses. It will be something that's controllable. We know that we can cope with what's coming our way. It's predictable. It also does not overwhelm our coping. And with positive stress, we have available supports. And I want to take our minds back. You all are a bunch of folks who have been thinking about adversity and resilience, and take your mind back to being a child and to raising our children. And what we know is that all human beings in their developmental stage need positive stress. They need it. We need it, because it helps us to grow. As human beings, we have to become what I'll call go into disequilibrium. We got to be, challenged a little bit in order to grow back into equilibrium. This is a developmental concept. And what we know is that if parents or caregivers or other invested adults are there supporting children through challenges, through changes, even through things that are not really very fun, like going to the doctor to get a shot in your arm and immunization, that kids don't like that. I don't like that either. But even those kinds of challenges can be positive stress, or at least tolerable stress, with the support of an adult. And what we do is we begin to grow rings of resiliency by meeting the challenges. Our brains actually grow more resilient with every challenge we overcome. That's just part of being human. So the concept of like helicopter parenting that we've talked about in some, the last couple decades, helicopter parenting where you don't really let your kid get uncomfortable, you kind of pick them up before they fall. That is actually taking away their possibility for having the growth that comes from positive stress. So we're going to say, yay, stress. We like you in moderate, copable doses. Now let's think about negative stress. Negative stress actually can be physically and emotionally harmful. And it can slow our progress down because it can make us kind of paralyzed or scattered. And it may block us from completing challenges or tasks. Negative stress comes mostly for us when there's a conflict between the demands of the situation and the amount of control we have, or the amount of control we believe we have to meet those demands. So we're talking about just regular negative stress, day-to-day stuff right now. We're not talking about traumatic stress at this point. So I'll give you an example from my own life. One of the things I do in my consultation work is I work for public defense attorneys, usually federal public defenders, who have hired me to write very long narratives around inmates who are facing death penalties. I get to know that inmate. I interview their family members, maybe teachers that they've had. I read stacks and stacks and stacks of records. There's a lot to synthesize, and it takes me hours upon hours to create that narrative that will be used in court. So recently, I was asked to turn a report around in 3 or 4 days that I had been led to believe would not be needed. In other words, there was a plea agreement on the table. They were sure they were going to get it, and they said, "Don't spend your time creating a report because we're really not going to end up using it." And that was my expectation. So I did not get myself teed up, even in terms of my organizational notes and things, for the report. And suddenly I was to do it. And I went into a negative stress spiral because I had to deliver. This is life and death. This is important. This is what I do. And I began to think I had to get that task done. My adrenaline was up, my cortisol was up, my heart was pounding, I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't very efficient. I was a mess. So I had to use some of the resiliency techniques that I'm going to talk to you about. And I slowed myself down, and I remembered that it's important to breathe. So I breathed. And in my breathing, I'm going to take you all through this in a moment. I got to the point where I could think again. And then I asked myself a series of questions. And at the end of the questions, I knew what to do. I knew what I had control over and what I didn't. And what I didn't have control over was time. It was a resource that I didn't have. What I had control over was writing an email to the attorney and saying, this is not a tenable request. I cannot do this in 3 days. I have other things already on my calendar, for one, but for two, it can't be done in 3 days. So you need to ask for a continuance, or we need to have a different plan for my product. And lo and behold, he got us a continuance. But I couldn't think of that solution because I was in negative stress spiral. So that's just a day-to-day negative stress, and we all have those. But negative stress can become toxic stress. And this is a new concept that I want to talk about. So I'm leaving just negative stress, which I've just given an example of. And now we're talking about toxic stress. If I had stayed at that level of negative stress for a prolonged period of time, weeks, months, it would have actually changed the neurochemistry of my brain to the point where I could have had real trouble with an anxiety disorder or depression. Because for one, I wasn't sleeping, right? But the chemicals, toxic stress happens when those stress hormones, which can be helpful in the short run, stick around in the brain and actually begin to do damage to the balance of our neurochemistry. And also we know that, for example, in combat veterans, when we look at their brains on fMRI, we can see that the structures of their brains have, even if they've had years of combat stress, the structures have even changed in size. But so neurochemically as well as neurostructurally, brain structure, this toxic stress hanging around for a long time can really be detrimental to our brains and to our bodies. So toxic stress, unlike positive or tolerable stress, is severe, prolonged, ongoing. It is uncontrollable, and it overwhelms our coping. And along with that, we have lack of supports. We don't have the resources that we need or the supportive people that we need. We know that supportive people can calm our brain. We have something called the vagus nerve, we're going to talk about later. And social support can calm that and help us feel safe again. Back to childhood. Children who are raised in environments that are not safe, but that are chaotic, have severe toxic stress, abuse, neglect, violence in the family, a parent that cannot meet their needs due to a mental illness that is debilitating their resources, or due to impairment by substance use that is taking away their normal parenting responses. That's toxic stress in childhood. And that is also something for us to think about, because the developing brain is developing so quickly that it begins to adapt to toxic stress rather than, and that's more adapting to survival, fight, flight, freeze, and not adapting to the positive, supportive environment that will wire the brain up for trust. So again, in early development, we know that toxic stress wires that brain up for survival and changes the structures of the brain, whereas positive environments wire up for a very good stress response system and for trust and learning and exploration. So those are just important concepts about stress. But what exactly is stress? What is it? It is, stress. We're talking about the chemicals it releases, but stress either signals the body to face a threat or to flee for safety. Stress is actually our body's way of keeping us alerted to, are we safe or are we not safe? Basically, that's an easy way to think about stress. So why would I have gone into kind of a threat system when asked to do a report that I didn't think I was going to be able to produce? What was happening there? Was my life threatened? Was my safety threatened? Yes, because we as humans evolved in a group. We could only survive with one another. We had to have the group or our tribe or our people with us way back when we were cave persons, or we would die. We died without each other. So our brains wired up to alerting us if we think we're going to be out of the group, which can include failing at your job or failing with a family task, because our amygdala, the part of our brain in our limbic system that says threat, it's saying you could get kicked out of the tribe. You might be rejected. You might get abandoned. That's what it's saying automatically. We don't hear those words, but I invite you to think about that. When your stress response system goes off, wonder with yourself, is this life or death? You won't have time to wonder about that if a car is hurtling down the road and you have to jump away. If it says jump away from the street, please do jump away. But much of the time, we begin to get stressed and uptight when our alarm system goes off for a reason that's really not life or death anymore in our experience. So we can get ourselves in pretty wound up places when, if we use some of the techniques we're going to talk about, we don't have to be so wound up. Because truth be told, long-term stress does impact our health. Long-term stress damages our natural immune system because our stress response system is tied to the immune functions. And so what happens is we can begin to contract disease and even things as simple as colds and flus. Our body isn't going to throw these things off as well. If we have a disease process already, like heart disease or diabetes or uh, cancer, having a strong immune system is going to be very, very important to our recovery or to our maintenance of our systems. So the impact of stress over time really can wreak havoc on and give us serious health problems, such as heart disease. It can cause heart disease or hypertension, high blood pressure. It can cause the conditions that have our DNA expressing metabolic disorders like diabetes. I have DNA for diabetes really strongly. I do, from my family tree, and I know I have to watch for that. However, I also know that if I allow my lifestyle to be too stressful, that could be one of the factors that could set off my DNA to express the diabetic tendencies. So we especially know that for mental well-being, keeping our stress low and keeping ourselves balanced is so important if we have family histories of anxiety disorders, depression, bipolar disorders, and the like. So, not to belabor the identification of stress and anxiety signals, but just to, make a point that we do need to be our own detectives, right? We need to begin to be aware of what's going on in our emotions and our bodies. And we need to wonder with ourselves or for our loved ones, are these anxiety and stress signals showing up? And if so, do we need to get on top of those? So you can see that there's a lot of things on this list, including being more reactive, having more negativity, being overwhelmed, having difficulty sleeping, headaches, memory loss, concentration problems. These are signs of stress and anxiety, and many others on the list. And what we also know is that anxiety and depression are very close cousins. They kind of travel together along the same neural pathways, which is why we use similar medications for those two conditions. We often are prescribed the SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, for anxiety and depression because they travel together. They're often part of each other. If you have a depressive disorder, you often have anxiety as well, and vice versa. So that's important to be looking for the commonalities between the two. Here are some signs of depression, which have some of the exact same signs that you're looking for. However, what sets depression aside is really this blue mood, or this persistent sadness that comes with depression, and often thoughts of death or thoughts of not wanting to be around anymore, being a burden to others, and also thoughts of suicide, and sometimes even attempts to take one's life. So depression, while it may also have some of the difficulty concentrating and memories and sleep difficulty and negative thinking like anxiety, it has this very unique set of symptoms just unto itself of this sadness that's persistent. I do want to say something about depression that I think is important. This isn't just about being sad or just about being heartbroken. We all have times of sadness and grieving and heartbreak. And it's really important for us as humans to experience those emotions. That's part of the human experience. And what we're learning about resilience is that leaning into the hard emotions and paying attention to those and giving ourselves compassion for those is actually helping us become more resilient. The pushing down of sadness or the pushing down of grief is not helpful because we're not metabolizing those things. So depression is only a disorder when it is persistent, very prolonged, and intense. We will have periods of sadness. We will have days that are just bad days. We might even say, oh, I'm so depressed today. But we're not exactly really depressed. What we are is sad. And we'll talk about being aware of that and leaning into that a little bit and why that's important. In fact, we're going to talk right now about why that's important. So this is a book, My Grandmother's Hands. You'll see it up in the little picture there by the young man. The young man, Charlie the Prophet, has a YouTube. You're welcome to go look that up later, where he takes us through these 5 steps for anchoring the body. But this book, My Grandmother's Hands, some of you may have read it. And if you have, chat to each other, let each other know what you thought of the book. But this is a book by Resmaa Menakem. And Resmaa Menakem was a student of therapy. He's a therapist, and he really works with people who have had trauma. Trauma being the body and mind's response to overwhelming events that we can't cope with in the moment because it's too much. Trauma from childhood or trauma in adulthood. He helps take care of people with traumatic experiences. And what he's learned is that the body holds trauma. And he learned that from Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score. And then he's added to that literature by talking about in this book how there is what he describes very well, racialized trauma. And he talks about the kind of trauma that comes from our ancestry and is actually held within our DNA. And we know from the neuroscience through animal research and also through research looking back on people that have come to our country who had been enslaved, taken from their countries, enslaved, their families torn apart, beaten, treated horribly, traumatized, all of our African American population coming from those roots has been, we are now finding that we have correlations with higher hypertension rates, higher heart disease rates. That's just one example for persons of African American descent as compared to persons of Caucasian Euro descent in our country. We've looked at our indigenous people who were also traumatized on the Trail of Tears, taken from their homes, put into reservations, had their children separated into boarding facilities, etc. And those folks have higher rates of diabetes, higher rates of alcoholism, just to name a couple of conditions. We've looked at people who survived, whose ancestors were in the Holocaust, and some survived the Holocaust in order to have families still. And there has been very interesting new research by someone called Yehuda, who is showing that the DNA of those persons still carries PTSD symptoms that are brought down into the generations with their children. So Resmaa Menakem says all of us come from somewhere where we have DNA that's been affected in some traumatic way. He calls persons from African American descent, persons that he calls those black bodies. He calls persons that look like me white bodies, and talks about that we have trauma from Europe before we got here, where we had tribal wars against one another. He talks about blue bodies. That's our law enforcement bodies. And he talks about how that group of people have their own trauma from the work that they do, plus whatever they got through their ancestors. And Resmaa Menakem says the way through this stress and trauma is to metabolize it. He calls it facing the clean pain versus keeping it and stuffing it down where it stays as dirty pain. Clean pain versus dirty pain. And here are the 5 steps. And you all can think about things in your own life if you would like to. where you can think about a situation that's happened to you. But step one is settling, calming, and soothing our mind, our heart, and our body. Breathing in, breathing out, settling into maybe a place that you're so comfortable that there's nothing challenging your comfort, wrapping in a blanket, sitting out in the sun in your garden area, sitting by a stream, sitting on your bed, wherever you're comfortable, and noticing the sensations that come up in your body, mind, and heart. Noticing them, acknowledging them. This is called clean pain, facing what we don't want to face, but not running from it, not avoiding it. Dirty pain is avoidance, denial. And when we keep our pain dirty in avoidance and denial, Resma Menakem suggests that we then respond from our most wounded parts because we've suppressed them and we haven't metabolized. So Menakem reminds us to accept the discomfort, sit with it, stay present with it, feel the ambiguity, notice it, and then respond from the best parts of yourself, from the best parts of yourself, and begin to talk with those parts and say, for me, what comes up for me a lot when I feel something is grief. And I can just put my hands on that part of my heart and I can say, hello, grief. Yeah, you're there again. I feel you. What is it you need to tell me today? What do I need to do today for you, my grief that is part of me? How can I bring the best part of myself to this feeling? And then I can do that. I can remember the good times. I can go and do something in honor of my loved one. Whatever that is for me, my best part, I can do that. And then Menakem says, safely discharged any extra energy that's remaining. If you've stirred a bunch of stuff up, maybe it's anger, and maybe you're responding from your best part, but it's still there. What are you gonna do? Discharge that energy. Find a supportive person to vent it out to. Go walk briskly, exercise, dance, play drums. Anything that's bilateral movement is going to help discharge. And this is how Menakem reminds us we can manage our pain so that it is metabolized and becomes clean and not dirty pain. We have sent you this poster. I believe, Lisa, tell me if I didn't, and I will send it with the other in a minute after we talk. I want everybody to have this poster. But again, this is another way to think about Menakem's work. This isn't his work, but it's the same kind of process. It's the brave process. It's facing the pain in a clean way kind of a process. And again, you start with the B of breathing. What we know is if you can fill your whole diaphragm with beautiful, delicious air, like you're blowing up a balloon, fill it from your pelvis all the way to your shoulders. Just do that right now. Just, delicious breath in, and then you hold it for some counts, and then you exhale that and release that. You begin to tame your body and your mind and your soul and your heart. You get into the R, you're now relaxing. If you felt muscles that were tense, you might be moving those muscles around, moving your shoulders, rolling your neck. You're going to let go of that tension throughout that body. And once the body is settled, just like in Menakem's anchors, you can begin to have clarity in your mind, and you can ask, what are the facts? What's going on? Like I did with the example I gave. I'm like, the facts are I don't have enough time to do my job. And that is the facts. So why am I fighting against time? I can't fight time. That's not within my control. What am I feeling? I'm feeling out of control. And so then you're asking yourself, then you validate your emotions. Just like I showed you. If anger shows up, you're going to say, ooh, oh yeah, that person annoyed you. Oh yeah, I'm annoyed. Oh, I'm angry. I'm going to identify it. With children, when we're working with kids, I always teach parents that when a kid's having a temper tantrum or some big feeling, you name it to tame it. That's what Daniel Siegel says to do. Name it to tame it. So you say to the kid, whew, big feelings. I think I'm seeing mad. Is that right? Ooh, big feelings. And identifying it, name it to tame it, it actually helps us with ourselves as well. That's your V. And then you're ready for your E of brave, which is, what are my next steps now that I've gotten clarity, that I've confirmed my emotions? What are my next steps? Who can support me? What we know from resilience science is that our support team, the people around us, our network, the people who care about us, who know us, or even who just have something to offer us, our support people raise resilience. The more of that we have, the better for our resilience. I wanted to just mention the vagus nerve on this slide real quick as well. Resmaa Menakem's work, he also talks to us about the vagus nerve, which is also called, some people call the soul nerve. And there's a nerve that runs down our body. It's connected to our gut. It's connected to our throat. It's connected to our heart. It runs through the center of us. It has about 100 million neurons, the vagus nerve. And some biologists call our gut our second brain. Why would they call it our second brain? Because of that vagus nerve. Because if we pay attention to the vagus nerve, or our soul nerve, we might notice things like this: a tightening of the throat. What is that telling me? A sudden sense of nausea. What is that telling me? Your stomach dropping, your jaw clenching. All of these body signs are telling us something's not going right, or you've got a feeling or a big emotion that's being projected to you. So stop, be aware of it. Why is my jaw clenching? Then you can name it to tame it. Ooh, I'm feeling a little bit angry. I'm feeling some anger coming on. Your vagus nerve has told you that. So ask your body, what are you telling me? Be curious, lean into it. This nerve is also connected to our fight, flight, freeze, our survival brain. So the vagus nerve doesn't think, it gives us body clues. And it can really help us understand if danger is lurking, or, we talk about our heart sinking, like disappointment. Oh, our heart sinking, we use that term. That's the vagus nerve. That's the vagus nerve telling us something that we need to know. I hope that you'll use the 5 anchors or the brave today as a daily practice whenever you have a moment to be curious about your feelings. So moving into resilience. Resilience really is something that we can increase. And I think that that is the main point of this talk. Even though we are born with various temperaments, some of us are born with a more robust, kind of thrill-seeking, kind of pressing the limits, out there temperament, personality. Others are born with a more anxious, kind of checking things out, a little more anxious temperament. We're born with different DNA around our temperaments. Then we have life experiences, life lessons that may help us learn lessons around resilience or facing adversity and bouncing back. Some of us may have lessons that taught us the opposite, that taught us to avoid, that didn't help us learn how to bounce back. We all have our experiences and our own histories. But what we do know is that even now, no matter where you are in your life journey, you can become more resilient, irregardless of your life experiences or your temperament. You have the capacity to build resilience. And what we know is we all need it because adversity affects everybody. So one thing we can do is choose where we focus our attention. And we can ask, am I focusing my attention on negative aspects of the situation or the positive aspects? And what can I change? What do I have some control over? And what are the things I have to accept? In my story, I had to accept that time was what it was. I couldn't change time. So what we know is that having kind of an attitude of gratitude, as they say, noticing, even if it's something like, you know what, I just really messed up and I'm grateful for the lesson I just learned. I'm grateful that I learned that this lesson so that I can build myself up for the next time I face this situation. We can even turn our attention to the lesson learned, and that practice of looking for the positive and the gratitude begins to build our resilience. So whatever happens in adversity to you, you need to ask yourself this question: what I'm doing right now in my adversity, is it helping me or is it hurting me? And therein lies your answer of if you need to change your strategy, because you really don't want to be hurting yourself. So again, there's a lot of ways to increase resilience. We'll talk about some of those in this talk, but we do know that that support system is an important way to boost resilience, getting a good support system. We know that having a positive view of yourself and confidence in your abilities boosts resilience. So that's a place you can work. If you are feeling unsure of yourself, you can do some things to help your skill base go up a bit. This is all from the science of resiliency. We know that having good communication skills boosts resilience. We know that good problem-solving skills boosts resilience. These are things that can be trained. You can go to courses on communication skills. You can look at YouTubes and different resources on how to boost those skills, or even problem solving. We certainly can teach these to our children. Resilient people, and as we boost resilience, we understand that suffering is a part of life. And indeed, we don't welcome suffering, we resilient people, but when tough times come, people with higher resilience seem to understand tough times will come. It's part of being human. And that way we don't have to feel like, why me? Why did this happen to me? Why is the world picking on me? So those are a few things we know about resilient people. I'm going to give you a quote now from Maya Angelou. Here it comes. You may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated. In fact, it may be necessary to encounter the defeats or to go through the suffering so that you can know who you are, what you can rise from, and how you can still come out of it. A little bit like Menachem talks about facing the suffering, facing the defeat with clean pain. What can we learn about who we are? Sometimes we get a lot of gifts from adversity because we actually learn something about ourselves that might be really helpful going forward. We actually can change and be more resilient or more compassionate or more whatever. All of you have in your packets that were sent to you a resilience self-assessment as well. Here it is on the screen. And again, I just want to invite everybody to take this handout and rate yourself on resilience. Because if you rated yourself on that other one about stress and energy burnout, if you've got a lot of resilience, this is going to offset that stress one. So you're going to put the two together, two bookends. What is my stress and where's my balance? And how much resilience do I have to bring to my stress? And then you can begin to create a plan for yourself around that balance. So I invite you to do this on your own time. Let's dive into some of the techniques and tips for upping our resilience. What we know is that we can actually heal the brain. Yes, even now, as old as we are, and I know that you can learn a foreign language when you're 1 and 2 and 6 months. You can learn a foreign language without any effort whatsoever. You just come out bilingual if you're exposed, because the brain is that moldable. But if you're an adult, it's harder to learn a foreign language. But we can, can't we? We can. It just takes more effort. The same with healing the brain and growing resilience. We can create new neural pathways. We know from the science of resilience, for example, 8 weeks of meditation has been shown to actually create new neural pathways that look different on fMRI for people who have been in the study versus those who have not. And you have a calmer, settled, peaceful brain, even after only 8 weeks of that practice. Now you have to keep practicing. What we know is that the part of the brain that wants to give us trouble in terms of threat, and it also wants to save our lives, so we love that part of our brain, it's our limbic brain. It's where our fight, flight, freeze lives. And our emotions live there around fear and such. And what we know is that that part of our brain can communicate with the frontal part of the brain, which is the brain that thinks. That's the part of our brain that thinks. And what we want to do with meditation and other mindfulness techniques that we'll talk about is we want to create a better partnership between that limbic brain and the part of the brain that has the power to help us calm down, to help us say self-statements and remind us to breathe and all of these things. So you can see that that prefrontal cortex is pretty darn important around so many wonderful things, including fear modulation, including body and emotion regulation and response flexibility, including empathy, etc. It's a really, really important part of our brain. And so we can empower that wonderful frontal part of our brain by doing some resilience practice. So I ask you now to think, are you mindful? In other words, is your mind full? Or are you mindful? Notice the difference. Mindful is, I've got this to do and I've got that to do and I'm worried about this and I'm thinking about the past and I'm thinking about the future and I'm thinking about all these things. But mindful is, I'm right here in the present. Only my senses are seeing, my senses are only experiencing what is right here in the present moment. So I'm actually right here. I'm right here with you. I'm not thinking about the future and worrying, and I'm not regretting that thing I did in the past. I'm just right here. What we know about being in the present and practicing mindfulness, that is being right here in the present, taking in through our senses only what's here. What we know is that if we spend even just 10 minutes a day doing that, it helps our brains settle and clear. And if we do mindfulness practice for longer than that, all the better. So why do I know this and why am I so passionate about this whole talk? It's because of my own story. So this is me, professional clinical psychologist turned hiker on Grandfather Mountain in Boone, North Carolina. This is me. In 2019, I was overworking, overstressed, not being mindful, but being mindful. And at the same time, having a very difficult time in my family situation with a young adult son who had fallen into the opiate crisis and was struggling with addiction. And so much of my energy and heart and soul and mind were wrapped up in wanting to fix that, as if I had that kind of control. Wanting to fix it. And between that scenario and my work, which was working with foster kids who were having lots of traumas and tragedies of their own, working with all their therapists, it became too much. And I tipped my wellness balance. And I went to my boss and I said, listen, I need some time off. I've got to do something here. And I found this retreat center called the Art of Living Institute up in Boone. And I went there for 8 days by myself. And I visited Michelle Moser and Wally on the way there because they just happened to live at the base of that. And I went to the mountain and I learned how to do breathing practice called pranayama, sky breathing, a breathing practice. I learned to do yoga. I soaked in nature. I got some massage spa kinds of things that are from the Ayurvedic Indian tradition. I ate detoxifying food from the Ayurvedic cooking tradition. And I was mindful for 8 days. And I've never, ever been the same. I've always been able to return to the mountain. Doing that for myself, beginning a practice, which I can still do at home or wherever I am, having a practice, I learned that my whole mind changed, my whole soul changed, my whole perspective changed when I learned what it felt like to slow myself down, lean into my pain, metabolize my pain, and most importantly, understanding what I had to let go of, what I had to accept, and only concentrating on that which I had some chance of changing. So I was changed in a dramatic way that has lasted for 4 years. And it has lasted through the death of my son 2 years ago. This 2 years ago, last April, 2 years ago in 2021. And I still had my practice, and I had practiced all the way through so that I could manage that adversity, that heartbreaking loss that is still with me every day. But I know how to go to it. I know how to breathe through it. I know how to manage the suffering. And I am better because of the suffering. I am more compassionate. I have many more, a much more sense of my meaning in life. I have more compassion for myself and others. And even my beautiful son, before he passed, he said to me, Mom, I'm really glad that I have gone through addiction. And this is when he was in a recovery mode. And I said, really? He said, yeah. I said, why? And he said, because if I hadn't gone through addiction, I'd be a jerk. Through his own adverse experiences and his own suffering, he emerged a person that he liked better. He saw the gifts even through addiction. So to this day, I carry in my pocket a little coin. I call it my David coin, which is my son's name. And it has a tree on one side. I'm holding it up to the camera, which I love trees and I love nature. And on the other side, it has the serenity prayer. Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So much of what I'm going to say in the next couple of minutes has to do with that prayer, with that mantra. Here are my tips. Always have a healthy foundation of diet, good diet, nutritional, and good water hydration, a healthy sleep routine. We want to get to stage 3 and 4 of sleep, those deep sleeps. We want to have our rapid eye movement. It consolidates our minds, keeps us sane, and delivers a lot of toxins out of our physical body as we sleep. Healthy exercise, healthy support system, and one that might not be on your foundation, but I really want it to be for all of us, play, laughter, fun, every day. And if I haven't had that, I go and I put on Good Day Sunshine by the Beatles. I tell my little device, whose name I will not say, to play it. She plays it. I get my little 5-pound weights and I dance around my kitchen island. And I laugh and I have fun. But what about the rest of our daily diet? I do want to talk to you a bit about some of these other practices that you can add. You got to do what's on the left, but what's on the right, the mindfulness practice or the yoga, nature, gratitude practice, creative flow, anything rhythmic, finding awe and beauty and inspiration, maybe going to art museums, hearing beautiful concert music, finding those experiences. And controlled breathing is like a first must. How much exercise do you need? Even 30 minutes or more 3 times a week will change your brain and body. The mental health benefits of exercise are going to last for your lifetime if you stick with them. And there's so many benefits of exercise that we can have. Breathing, controlled breathing. These are some of the ways you can breathe. Breathing, like I told you earlier, where you're filling your whole diaphragm up and then letting go slowly on the exhale. Breathe in through your nose and let go slowly on the exhale. The Navy SEALs practice what we call the 4 square breathing. And I'm just going to do this with you right now so you have at least this one skill. You're going to breathe in for 4 seconds on the top of the square. You're going to hold that on the second part of the square. You're going to exhale for 4 seconds on the bottom, and then you're going to hold for 4. So everybody breathe in to the count of 4, fill it up. 1, 2, 3, 4, hold. 2, 3, 4, exhale. 2, 3, 4, and hold. 2, 3, 4. Then you would breathe in again. If you do this 5 or 6 times, you will reset your mind in the moment. Your cognitive is so important, reframing and rethinking. Reframing setbacks as opportunities for growth. Letting your feelings be your informers. Be curious, just like we did on the Ruse Momentum going in. What are you telling me, feelings? You're going to practice positivity. Find that good. Find the silver lining. Find the gratitude in something. And finally, get perspective. For one day, I want to invite you to pay attention to what's going on in your mind. Do you have the habit of seeing the glass as half empty or half full? Notice, take count of this. And if you begin noticing I'm seeing it as half empty, begin to reframe it as half full. The 60-second reality check, and by the way, you'll get all of these slides, so you'll have these things. This is basically where you're kind of reframing. You're saying, hey, is what just happened to me really a catastrophe? Is it this going to be a big deal in 24 hours? Is it going to be a big deal in a week? If it's not, then I can just breathe this out and forget it. Am I taking it too personally? And if I react right now to this thing that's happening to me, is it going to be helpful or hurtful? These are the 60-second reality checks that I really think can be helpful for you. I want you to rethink in another way. Get rid of that inner critic. If that inner critic starts saying, Patti, you are so stupid, say, you're fired, out of here, because I don't need you. I do not need you. What I need is compassion for myself and others, and gratitude and acceptance. And I need to set appropriate boundaries and limits so that I don't overuse my energy. I'm going to think about living by this serenity mantra. I'm going to remember that that's what Patti lives by with her little coin every day. And by the way, when I'm out in the world, if I see somebody and feel somebody needs that coin, I take it right out of my pocket and put it in their hand. I may not know them. They can be a perfect stranger on an airplane. It has happened. Because everybody can benefit from these really important words about acceptance. Self-compassion. Ask yourself, I am beating myself up right now. What would my best friend tell me? They're not going to say, Patti, you're so stupid. They're going to say, you've had a tough day. And you know what? You've just had an anniversary of your son's death. And you're doing the best you can with what you got right now, girlfriend. Come on. I'm with you. Do that for yourself. So finally, how have you coped with stressful events in your past? Have you coped in a helpful or hurtful way? How is stress affecting you now? How do you metabolize your stress? How do you rate your support system? How can you take some of these ideas and build your resilience? You can do reminders of all of these things. You can sleep, you can get in nature, you can rethink, you can find beauty. You can do one of these intentional practices, whether it's breathing, mindfulness, meditation, journaling, yoga. All of these resources have been sent to you by Lisa through the SBI, through this group here. All of these sheets you have from the Trauma Stewardship or the NCTSN, they give you moment by moment ways to manage your day around resilience. They're beautiful, wonderful resources. You also have this Wheel of Life Satisfaction that I invite you to fill out and score it for, and not even score it for yourself, make goals for yourself. So I'm going to leave you with this Howard Washington Thurman idea. Remember that it's our choice if we engage or not with this crazy world. We can cut off social media. We don't have to watch the news in the morning. We can protect our mornings. We can choose our level of engagement for the most part. And Howard Washington Thurman, he's a philosopher, theologian, mystic, educator, civil rights worker. He is now passed on. But here's a quote from him. Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and then go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. I grew up with Howard Thurman in my house because he was a mentor to my father, who went to Boston University, where Dr. Thurman was a professor. And Dr. Thurman was a mentor to Martin Luther King Jr. He's an incredible presence in my own life because I heard his quotes all growing up. He was also the dean of Howard University. That's where this comes from. So I leave you with his thoughts. This is the last slide. Just to ask yourself, Dr. Thurman asks you, come alive. So what can you control that makes you alive, that makes you positive? Whatever it is, if you do that, it will raise your resilience. And it's up to you to figure that out. It's up to you to begin building more resilience. I know I just rushed through that, but boy, it's been great to be with you all today. I hope you got something out of it and that the handouts will be helpful to you.
Thank you, Patty. This is a great talk. We just needed to have planned an hour and a half, which is, I knew I should have planned that. But I really appreciate, when you were talking in the beginning, I knew you, so I knew the authenticity. And I think it was so brave of you to tell your story, because I think that really does help people see their way to resilience, even in those darkest times. So thank you so much for doing this. I know folks probably need to get going, but if you have a question, feel free to unmute, because Patty can hang out with us for a little bit.
Absolutely. Come on.
Hi, Patty.
Hi. I can't see who's talking.
Amy Diller.
Amy! Oh, hello.
This was wonderful. I really enjoyed it and needed it worse than I thought because I'm doing end of month billing.
So something that Amy does that is resilient, I'm gonna out you, Amy.
Oh God. Okay.
Amy is hilarious and makes me laugh and makes others laugh. And laughter, we know from the neuroscience, raises resilience and raises our good hormones.
Mm-hmm.
Good to see you, Amy.
I got to see Amy the whole time, and like she was cheering and doing all kinds of chatting and making
Little
like she was
expressive.
like giving you all kinds of feedback.
I see Jan Dick. Hi, Jan.
I really joined this just because of you, Patty, because I just wanted to see you, and it gave me so much.
Yay!
So much you. So thank you. I miss you.
Oh, mwah.
Did I see that we could get a copy of this, the slides
Yes.
for this presentation? Is that up in the chat or somewhere else?
Yeah, well, you put your email in the chat.
Great.
Lisa's going to put all that together. If y'all can answer the feedback, that'd be helpful, but she'll put that feedback in a link, the certificate of attendance, all the handouts and the PowerPoint. So Lisa will be putting all that stuff as a follow-up. Thanks for your comments, Samantha. That's awesome.
Wow, there are lots of comments. Thank you, everybody. And I see other names that I know. Hello, friends.
All right. Well, I know you have a place to go, Patty. And so, but thank you so much for bringing this message to the SBI and sharing it with folks. And I know that some people will be so inspired. They want colleagues to see this. It'll be recorded and it'll be on our website. So you can, actually share that in a group of folks that you're working with becoming resilient. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And if you're doing it with a group that you're facilitating, you can have those handouts and you can actually do a little workshop format and have people fill those out and have discussion about what they've learned about themselves and that kind of thing too. So have fun.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. We don't have any more SSRI series presentations planned. We will start working on that, probably get one in July or August and restart the series. But if you're a person who would like to do a presentation, we are open to it. If you have some names of people, we are open to it. We are a format to try to bring folks together around resiliency. So let us know if you've got an idea for us. We are happy to hear it. All right. Have a good, resilient day. Be one of those folks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Michelle. Catch up with you later.
We will. Bye.